name is Shannon Chiarel. I currently work at Columbia University, but the work that I'm going to be talking about today was done in a partnership between Monmouth University and Stockton University. So today we're going to be talking about modern interpretations of Revolutionary War wrecks. So I'm focusing on my area on the Mullica River wrecks, specifically ones that were involved in the Battle of Chestnut Neck, also known as the affair at Little Egg Harbor. So first, we're going to start off with a little historical context. So the early United States Navy was founded in October of 1775 when the Continental Congress created the Naval Committee. At this point, they commissioned 17 vessels, and in 1776, they increased it to 30 vessels. However, by the end of 1781, there were only 9 vessels left. So the overall unsuccessfulness of the Naval Committee was mostly due to 3 parts. So first off, poor leadership. Most of the people on the committee had very little sailing, if any, experience and had almost no naval experience. So a lot of poor decisions were made because they just didn't have the knowledge or experience. Secondly, they were underfunded. Most colonies' naval committee only had fire ships, which are right here. They were generally ships that were out of commission or couldn't really be used any longer. They'd be set on fire and pushed out in the direction of an enemy vessel. A lot of the times they didn't hit, or they would sink before they made it. The idea was to try and blow up the ship. A lot of the times they were not particularly successful because obviously no one could be on board to navigate the ship, so you just kind of had to push it out and hope for the best. The other kind of ship that most colonies had was a row galley, which is over here. It was a small vessel where sailors would sit on benches and actually row the galley with oars. So again, it was not very easily maneuverable and it was not very quick, so it was not very efficient. The last major reason was that sailors were unmotivated. They were still getting the same rations and the same pay as soldiers on land, but then they were in a lot of danger. A lot of them didn't know how to sail properly, and overall they just didn't want to be there. Luckily for the Navy, privateering was very different. And it was very lucrative. It had a lot of young men that wanted to do this because you weren't just getting a small ration like you would in the Navy. Anything that was captured and sold to auction was split between the captain, the owner of the vessel, and the crew. So it was a lot more lucrative, and it was a lot more adventurous. So that's why it drew a lot of young men in. In order to become a privateer, you would have to apply for a letter of marque. A letter of marque basically made your pirating legal. So you were allowed to capture any vessel that was seen as an enemy of the colonies, so mainly British, sometimes French, and any weaponry or supplies that the Continental Congress needed, they would take, and everything else was left to be split amongst the crew, the captain, and the vessel owner. So once you sold it at auction, you could make a very hefty profit off this. A lot of the people who were privateering already had vessels, they already had sailing experience, they already had smuggling experience, they had naval battle and open water battle experience. So they were way more profitable and way more successful than the original Navy. If you look at this chart here, you can see that in 1776, when the Navy only had about 30 vessels, there were already 136 vessels operating under a letter of marque down here. By 1781, when the Navy only had 9 vessels left, there were about 449 vessels operating under letters of marque. Just one thing to keep in mind, these number of guns, they're not really referring to a bayonet or a shotgun, they're referring to a swivel gun like this, which looks a little bit more like a cannon than a handgun. So the privateers were so successful that Lloyd's of London said that American privateers were capturing about 5 times as many British vessels as Royal Navy vessels were capturing American vessels. In 1776, this caused the insurance rate of vessels going from England to the colonies to increase by 23%. So 23% on an insurance rate is a lot. So you can tell that they were really working hard to get all these ships out of there. So one of the favorite places of these privateers to hide out and to auction off their cargoes and their vessels was this area right here. So we have Little Egg Harbor over here, Chestnut Ridge right here, and the Forks up here. As you can see, the Mullica has a lot of sharp bends that become very shallow in many places, and it has a very strong current. So it's really hard to navigate, which gave them a lot of protection from people who didn't know the tide schedule or didn't know the best way to pilot a vessel up there. Therefore, George Washington, as well as several other generals, actively told American privateers that this little part of Chestnut Neck would be the best place for them to hide out. So many vessels were there. In June to September of 1778, when the battle, right before the battle occurred, the American privateers had captured 18 British vessels in a matter of a few weeks. So the British were infuriated. Therefore, on September 30th in 1778, Sir Henry Collins ordered Captain Henry Collins and Captain Patrick Ferguson to take 500 men and 13 vessels in order to break up the nest of rebel pirates. Unfortunately for them, on the way there, they hit severe weather and a lot of rough seas out on the ocean. So it took them from September 30th all the way to October 5th to actually reach Chestnut Neck. However, several of George Washington's spies had made it to Chestnut Neck on October 2nd. So most of the vessels were either moved or scuttled. So by the time the British got there, there was only a few men with muskets and a breastwork to actually defend them. So if you look down here, you can see an artist's rendering of the British burning down the town. Unfortunately for the British, they didn't have the knowledge to successfully navigate the Mullica River, and they landed up actually running 3 of their biggest and most expensive vessels aground and were unable to remove them. Therefore, they had to actually scuttle and burn down those ships. So not only were they unable to recover any of the vessels they went in for, they actually lost 3 more vessels. So score 1 for the American privateers, I guess. So one of the wrecks that we believe was part of this engagement is called the bead wreck. So it was named because in the 1975 investigation, they found many beads that they think they were using to trade with Native Americans. However, the only bead that's left at the Trenton Museum is this one right here. So through their work in about 1956, several recreational scuba divers rediscovered the bead wreck and the Kramer wreck. This work was done through the Atlantic Alliance for Maritime Heritage Conservation, and most of the work was led by Jack Fulmer. So in 1956, 1975, 1985, 1994, there was work done on the bead wreck. But as you can see, in 1975, there was barely anything left of the bead wreck, and by 1985, there was even less. Our current work, you can see there's almost nothing left. It's been almost completely disarticulated. If you look, it's right here on the map. You can actually see it's being cut in 3 different directions by 3 different currents, which is causing it to fall off the shelf. So the last time it was checked in 1985, it was in about 13 feet of water, and it's now in about 20-something feet of water, and it's about to fall off the cliff into about 50 meters of water. So it's about to get completely lost. So that's why we're trying very hard to work on doing anything we can to research this at this point. In the early 2000s, this anchor was actually accidentally dredged off the bead wreck by a university and was then gifted to Stockton University. We then got the permission from the Trenton Museum and the State Historic Preservation Office of New Jersey to work on conserving it. In order to do that, we did this process called electrolysis. So we put the anchor into a giant vat of water. We added a lot of soda ash. We inserted these electric rods, and we put in iron. Then you let it cook, you change the water every few months, and over time it takes the rust off the anchor and makes it more resistant to future rust. During this process, we actually found that there were some indentations on the anchor right here. We think that it was a weight, so we think it was 500 pounds approximately, but it's just one of the many cool things you get to see when you actually have a giant artifact like this. So most of the work that we've done so far has been through sonar. A lot of times we use a hummingbird and we use Starhawk to go through and create those images. However, we do use some other technological tools. So this was a multi-beam, which gives us the depth. We use it for bathymetry as well as imaging. So you can see this is the full wreck right here, and here's a close-up image of it. Like the bead wreck, the full wreck is actually also sliding off another shelf into deeper water, so it is also in danger. The full wreck was rediscovered in 2012, and it was named after William Full, who was one of the discoverers who passed away shortly after. We also have been trying to use 3D imaging like this to create better images of the full using the technology that we already have. Here is the Starhawk that we've been using. We also have been employing sketches through people who have scuba dived on the wreck. And we've been able to get some pretty great images, as you can see here. You can even see one of the mast steps right here. So we've been getting a lot of good work done on that. So some other interesting things we found about the full wreck is that we found all these artifacts after a couple of dives were done on it. So if you look at these images, you can see a lot of 18th century glass, which is suffering from glassic, which creates this iridescent shine, but it also seems to be melted. And in order to melt glass, it would have to be heated at a high degree for a long time, which suggests that this vessel may have been burned, which helps to try and points us at the fact that this was probably one of the vessels that was burned during the Battle of Chestnut Neck. It was probably a merchant vessel that was not good enough to sell, so they probably scuttled it and burned it down so that the British couldn't get it. We also have some bricks, which are hand-struck, unglazed bricks, which should be about the same period. And we have some charred wood. We also have a few pieces of iron that is nondescript. So we're not really sure what that is, so I didn't include images because they're not as pretty as these. The third wreck we're going to talk a little bit about is called the Kramer wreck. So some previous work was done here as well. So here is an image of a swivel gun like we saw in the previous images that was taken off a wreck near the Kramer. So they didn't think that it was off the Kramer, but because it was done by a recreational diver before the work started and it was never conserved properly, we're not sure of the exact location in which it came from. And we no longer have it. It completely disintegrated over time. So because it was not conserved properly. So this is the only image that we have of a swivel gun off any of these ships. The fact that there's no other swivel guns also helps to suggest that these were most likely merchant ships that privateers had taken in, rather than British naval ships that ran aground. Here's another image of the Kramer wreck from a 2017 investigation. And down here we have the Kramer wreck, a drawing that was done of it by scuba divers, again, Jack Bulmer and his whole crew, in 1985. So again, the current work we're doing is predominantly sonar work, just because these areas are really hard to dive. There's strong currents and there's a lot of recreational activities. So there's a lot of boats zooming in and out. So it's a little difficult to get down there. The Kramer is right against the Kramer, the Chestnut Neck Marina, which is owned by the Kramers, which is why it was named that. It, again, like the other two, is on a bit of a ledge. So it is, again, sliding down a slope, and it's starting to turn more and more on its side and may actually tumble down instead of just sliding down this slope. So it's also in danger. Some fun things about this is that there's a lot of debris before and after the Kramer that may actually lead us to finding more ships and more artifacts. We are excited about that. So in local lore, the Kramer, as well as a few other possible ships, are said to have been able to be seen from dead low tide in the 1950s and 1960s. So we do think that we may be able to find much more there. So interpretations. And because it is so difficult to get down there, the best that we can do to try and identify the ship is by comparing it to other known wrecks from the same area. So right here we have the Reed's Point, which is a merchant vessel, next to the Full Wreck, which is one of our most studied wrecks that we have in this area. Down here we have the Nancy, which is a British schooner, so it's got a very similar shape to the Full, and the keelson is in a similar position. Down here we have the Defense, which was a privateering brig. Again, it has a very similar stern. And down here we have the Rose Hill, which is a single mast sloop. So this is an example of a sloop. By comparing this way, we're assuming that the wrecks are almost all either sloops, brigs, or schooners. It's very difficult to tell because during the 17th century, most vessels were categorized by their type of rigging and their stern. So because most of them have absolutely no rigging except for what we assume are mast steps, and the sterns are almost all either disarticulated or completely covered in sediment, it's incredibly hard to actually determine what the vessel was. So some work that I did in libraries, I actually looked up in the Monmouth Library in the New Jersey room, they have a newspaper archive from the 1700s. So I was actually able to make a list of 180 vessels that were in the Chestnut area for 6 months leading up to the battle. After that, I took that list and I looked at the vessels that were in Chestnut Neck or mentioned anywhere in New Jersey for the next year. From that list, I then took any vessels that were either too large or too small and took them off the list as well. And I was able to compile a list of 31 vessels that may be the 3 vessels that we're looking at. So it's not definite, it's not definitive, but these are 31 possible names that these wrecks could be. So you could see the ship name, the type of vessel, the date last mentioned, and the location in which it was last mentioned. And last, we have our next steps. So we have a lot of potential sites. So in between the Full Wreck and the Bead Wreck, we have this, which looks something like it may be an anchor shape. We have a few undescript round vessel looking things. We're not really sure about those. And we have these kind of vessels that have ridging. So we think they may be planks. And then behind the Kramer, we have a lot of debris which has circular shapes like they could be vessels. So we're trying to work a lot more on that in the future, and we would really like to get some dives in the Chestnut Neck Marina. We just haven't been able to because of everything that's going on in the world. So hopefully we'll get to be able to do that soon, and then we can see, we may have even more wrecks. At the time of the Chestnut Neck battle, they said that there could have been at least 30 ships that were in that area at that time. So we can't say for certain which ones were there, which ones were taken up to the forks, or anything like that. So we could have a lot more ships that we find over the next couple of years while we do more work. Our last next step is that we would like to put these ships on the National Register of Historic Places. So the bead wreck is already on the list, and the full wreck is currently in the process of being registered. The next step would be to put the Kramer on. So the wrecks are technically in the Historic District of Port Republic, and they are in the Jacques Cousteau estuary. So they do have some protection, but the National Register listing would give them even more protection, both legally and through spreading awareness. It also opens them up to potentially getting funds for more research and for more signs to help keep recreational divers and a lot of fishermen that have been anchoring right on or next to these wrecks from doing so, through actually telling them the exact location of the wrecks. That way they're not accidentally throwing down an anchor on a 200-year-old ship. So those are our next steps. We're hoping that we can get those done soon. And thank you for listening.